Chapter 711 Race Against the Clock. Uncle Wu, give the order to mobilize the soul evolvers and soldiers. Have the combat helicopters go 10 kilometers ahead in the 8 main directions and make constant reports of the situation on the ground. Bai Zemin shouted as he ran towards the magic circle that would teleport him inside the battleship. I understood. Wu Keqian nodded immediately and without hesitation upon receiving Bai Zemin's order, not realizing that he sped up the process of passing the command even more. Your subclass marquee has been revoiced and removed from your records. If you want to obtain a leader-type subclass again, please consider the establishment of a faction. Wu Keqian's pupils trembled slightly as the green-lettered message from the soul record flashed in his eyes, informing him that he had just lost one of his great sources of power. Although Wu Keqian already knew that this was going to happen sooner rather than later, he was only delaying the inevitable. Wu Yijuan's father had obeyed the voice of Bai Zemin, which was filled with a tone of command that could not be refused. As he obeyed an order that was meant to lead the troops without hesitation, and considering the situation, the soul record immediately revoked his marquee subclass as it correctly identified him as a leader who had been replaced. Of course, this did not mean that Bai Zemin had received control of the Chinese Renaissance faction. There were still many things to be done to reach that optimal result. However, this also did not mean that he had not received something good even if it was indirectly. Xietain, you come with me. Bai Zemin shouted when he reached the magic teleport circle, and instead of immediately teleporting inside the ship he called out to a stunned Xietain. Oh okay. Xietain quickly nodded, partially snapping out of the daze she had fallen into after the soul record announced to her that her subclass loyal follower and one of the sources of her power had been deleted and removed from her records. She didn't know what was going on, but be that as it may, it was good news, which was why Xietain immediately rushed forward and stepped into the magic circle where Bai Zemin was waiting for her to initiate the movement. Son, where are you going at this moment? Bai Dilan called from a distance. Lightning began to thunder louder and louder in the increasingly dark sky, acting as a source of light even brighter than the sun itself. The entire base was in chaos, terrified survivors hid in their homes while others simply lost their heads and began to cause mayhem. Amidst so much noise and mess, even the strongest soul evolvers had to shout for their voices to reach each other. Father, I need to go and back up my team members that are up north. I'll take Mother with me just in case. Bai Zemin shouted in response. His transcendent faction, the people most loyal to him and with whom he had been fighting shoulder to shoulder since the beginning of the apocalypse, were practically given over to death in the midst of the chaos that was about to break loose. Among all of them, perhaps only Fu Xiafeng and Nan Gongyi had the ability to face an initial second-order existence each. Bai Zemin needed to hurry and return to support them, or else they would definitely be wiped out when the mana of the world empowered all living beings, among them, of course, mutant beasts and zombies. All right. Be careful. Bai Dilan replied loudly without hesitation. It was better for his son to take Yilinger with him, because although she had Shenmei and the Green Defender ring that could summon the spirit of a second-order defender tree, Yilinger was only a level 17 soul evolver, too low to even react against the attack of an agility-type beast, for example. Bai Zemin looked at Shangguan Bingshui, but instead of shouting some kind of instruction he simply had to look at her for a brief moment before she understood his intention. Don't worry, you go and take care of business in the north. Leave this side to me and the rest. She yelled. Her silver-white hair was currently a mess in the midst of the strong winds blowing in all directions, but her beautiful blue eyes were as bright and steady as ever. I will return as promptly as possible. Bai Zemin bellowed, finally activating the magic circle and disappearing in a flash of white light together with Xietain. After getting into the battleship, Bai Zemin disassociated himself from anything to do with the Chinese Renaissance faction. He had another mission now, and Shangguan Bingshui could take over this place until he secured the lives of the rest of his subordinates waiting for him. As Bai Zemin and Xietain ran towards the command room, the ring with golden runes on his right hand began to release intermittent glows constantly, a result of the orders Bai Zemin was giving. The engines powered up and the Sky Destroyer slowly began to build altitude as it turned in a northerly direction. Leader, are we going to pick up the initial members of your original faction? Xietain asked as she followed a few steps behind him. No, we are going to help defend the base in the process of construction. Bai Zemin replied in a serious voice. Humanity could not be in a single base, several needed to be built to function as military and logistical support centers. He continued, Xietain, when we get there and depending on the situation, I will count on you to activate Wolf Pack. The skill wolf pack could link Baizemen's subordinates with his records in a partial way such that unclassified existences could easily face first-order existences and first-order existences above. Level 40 could fight against normal initial second-order existences without overwhelming stats such as the red-colored weaver ants. Xietain was going to be crucial in case any fighting broke out, and Baizemen brought her with him because her importance might even be greater than his in several aspects when it came to group warfare. Xietain said nothing, she simply followed Baizemen silently. She had been observing him for all these days and came to understand better what kind of person the young leader was who in the near future would have control over more than 300,000 lives was. Baizemen was very friendly and even kind as long as his subordinates obeyed his orders when it was time to obey. He hated disobedience and detested lack of discipline. Xietain believed that as long as she avoided those two conditions, everything would be fine for her. The battleship had begun to move slowly, and by the time Baizemen reached the command room and sat down in the captain's seat, the ship was already quite close to the residential part of the privileged area. The walls in the command room had become giant screens, showing Baizemen and Xietain the current situation outside. The only word that could describe what they were seeing was disaster. Military vehicles and modified vehicles were speeding through the streets, soldiers yelling at residents to stay in their homes, residents standing in a daze looking up at the sky as the giant ship advanced over their heads, survivors crying, and more. However, the biggest turmoil was beyond the privileged area. It was at the base where the normal survivors were. Survivors running all over the place, police officers and low-level soul evolvers that couldn't join one of the 4 official guilds trying to quell all kinds of possible trouble rising up, lunatics that in the midst of the chaos took the opportunity to run out of their homes with torches and set fire to many establishments. And there were definitely a lot of worse things going on that couldn't be appreciated from the sky. We humans are truly a despicable race. Zombies, beasts, weaver ants, and even the marine race. They all join together to fight a common enemy when the situation calls for it, but we fight internally even when death is knocking on our doors. Baizemen spoke his thoughts aloud as his indifferent eyes scanned the situation below. Xietain was standing to his left. Her expression was complicated as she listened to the words Baizemen uttered. She would be 30 next year, and this was the first time in her life that she had seen a young man 10 years younger than her rationalize in such a way. Even she, who had seen a bit of everything after the apocalypse, Xietain could not help but wonder what kind of things the young man sitting on the leather seat beside her had seen to turn his heart this cold. Kong Jun, standing at the right side of Baizemen, listened to his words in silence. The large black cloak covered the entirety of his figure including his eyes, so it was hard to tell what the great third-order apocalyptic ant was thinking. "I'll be right back," Baizemen said, and immediately after he disappeared from his position, leaving only Xietain somewhat uncomfortable with the giant ant. He appeared directly in the teleportation room and a moment later was teleported to the outside of the flying warship. Baizemen could teleport from the command room to anywhere in the Sky Destroyer, but he could not teleport from anywhere into the command room, at least not temporarily. It was a too advanced function that needed to be unlocked first. Baizemen quickly approached the edge and looked down. The Sky Destroyer had stopped right in front of his house and just over 300 meters above. "Mom." Xietain had been in a daze looking at the large warship. Next to her was Shenmei, who had a serious expression on her face as she fiddled with a sharp dagger that had over 600 physical attack points, and held a 9mm pistol in her free hand meant to finish off small fries quickly and effectively. Hearing her son's voice, Xieinger's body trembled. She had been waiting for his return from the first moment he left the base, but Baizemen had not returned even half a month later. Even with Evangeline and Shenmei reassuring her that he was alive, Xieinger was still so worried about her 2 children that she was barely eating, and if it wasn't for him being a soul evolver she would have been sick by now. Xieinger raised her head higher into the sky just in time to see her little one plummeting down, making her eyes sparkle with joy and relief. Baizemen activated gravity manipulation in reverse to soften his fall, and in an instant his feet touched the ground gently. "My son." Xieinger immediately rushed over to hug him. She looked him up and down carefully and noticed several lick marks on his skin, but her mind was too anxious to realize that those lick marks were in no way the product of battles. "Your sister. Where is Mengqi?" Xieinger inquired anxiously. Evangeline could only confirm that nothing bad had happened to Baizemen, but no one knew anything about Mengqi. Now that she could get news from the best person, Xieinger immediately asked after making sure he was fine. "Don't worry, she is fine and is with father right now," Baizemen replied in a serious voice before quickly switching to the urgent topic. "Mom, we don't have time to chat right now. I'll explain everything on the way. Shenmei, you come with us." "On the way?" Xieinger was about to ask what he was talking about when suddenly her body felt lighter, and by the time she realized that her son was carrying her, her surroundings became a blur. In just an instant, Xietain found herself on top of the battleship, and in the next second, she had already been teleported inside. Xietain carried his mother while Shenmei followed behind. 3 bodies flashed through the corridors, and with Xietan's guidance they quickly reached the command room. For Xietain, it hadn't been more than about 60 seconds, or maybe a little more, but she finally got to see how powerful her son was. In fact, she didn't even feel a gust of wind cutting her face, which meant that he had been guarding her all the way to prevent her from getting hurt by the pressure generated by the speed. Back in the captain's seat of the ship, Xietain explained the situation to his mother while he controlled the Sky Destroyer. The giant warship gradually picked up speed until it soon became a flash of light that disappeared into the distance, leaving all the survivors of the base that had been paying attention to this large ship stupefied. Chapter 712, Beginning of the War Royal Harem. After Xietain explained the current state of affairs to his mother, Xietain finally got a general idea of what was happening and what might happen. With the Earth evolving, the mana of the world would become heavier than before, which would lead to the consequence that all living beings would become stronger. While it was true that humans would also become stronger when evolution reached a certain point, the strengthening of the other races was something that meant nothing but bad news for the weaker human race. Many things would become more challenging in many ways. The danger would grow to the point where some of the stronger ones could lose their lives at the slightest of carelessness. Even worse, many human establishments would definitely be destroyed this time, which would result in the death of thousands, tens of thousands, and probably even hundreds of thousands. I wonder how many soul evolvers or humans that have been fighting hard until now will lose their lives this time. Xietain sighed inwardly as he looked at the situation outside with complicated eyes. In the sky, lightning crackled constantly and thunder rumbled so loudly that the ground shook uncontrollably. On the ground, mutant beasts ran rampant from the different forests with bloodshot eyes, some fighting each other and devouring their kind while others simply ran in any direction and flattened anything that came their way. "Leader, look over there." Xietain suddenly took a step forward and pointed in the northwest direction. Her voice sounded pressing and even urgent. Xietain quickly looked in the direction pointed by Xietain, and he didn't need to zoom in on the holographic screen to understand what she wanted him to see. In the distance, approximately 5 kilometers to the north, several luminous explosions joined the lightning in the sky to spark the surroundings. Shattered rocks were flying everywhere and parts of a large forest were being cleared at surprisingly high speeds. It was plain to see that there were at least 2 powerful beings fighting each other in the forest. Xietain narrowed his eyes, and at the same time as he slowed the speed of the battleship's flight, he ordered in a deep voice, "Secondary cannon number 9, aim in a northwesterly direction. Coordinates 40.21612116.23471. A small part of the holographic screen detached, showing the cannon movement. The red-colored magic circle lit up and glowed over the muzzle of the secondary cannon but did not charge power as Xietain needed to give the order first. "Leader, why don't you just shoot and finish them all off over there?" Xietain asked curiously. The existences fighting there were definitely in the second order and were clearly above level 60 just based on the destruction they were causing. If those who were fighting at the front were zombies or mutant beasts, then they definitely needed to be destroyed before one of them fled to prevent them from growing more powerful and someday representing a danger to humanity. At this stage of the apocalypse, unclassified existences represented the basis of a race. First-order existences were the present and what kept a race alive. Last but not least, second-order existences, they represented the present and the future, were the guardians. As for third-order existences, they were leaders, creators, and destroyers. "First I want to make sure that the other party does not involve a human being," Xietain calmly replied, to which Xietain nodded along with Xietain. If one of the powerhouses in combat was from the human race, then it was better to recruit him or her than to kill them. While the odds were low, they were not 0%. The battle soon entered its climax after a few seconds, and it seemed that the existences involved in the deadly battle were losing their patience as they began to use way more stronger attacks and skills than before. Xietain noticed that the number of combatants was of 2. Boom! With a loud explosion that was heard even from far away, approximately 5,000 meters of the forest was swept away with broken trees and shattered stones flying everywhere. In the middle of a crater over 500 meters in diameter, a brown bear with red claws was ferociously hacking at the flesh of what appeared to be a bull whose skin was silver and its horns shone like gold. "Looks like there was no need to overthink it after all," Xietain muttered before quietly ordering, "Secondary cannon number 9, firepower level high. Fire when the charge is ready." On the separate small holographic screen, the crimson-colored magic circle began to light up and its glow soon covered the entire cannon body. Under Yilinger's wide-open eyes, a large beam of bright red light shot out with a noisy bang. Everyone watched as the beam of bright light grew in size, in a second breaking beyond the line of sight of the group inside the battleship and disappearing into the horizon heading northwest directly, into the ground. Immediately after, the red light disappeared for a brief moment, and during that brief moment, the sound of explosions coming from the distant battlefield ceased completely. However, the silence did not last long, as the terrifying power of the secondary energy cannon immediately followed. Boom! A huge red sphere rose approximately 50 meters, illuminating the surroundings with its crimson glow. The power of the laser beam had been so strong that the slashing wind exploded everywhere, wiping out a great part of the forest instantly. Although the destructive power could not compare at all to that which would be caused by the shockwave of a nuke explosion, its terror had made Yilinger's legs feel weak, and if not for Shinmei's help she might have fallen to the ground as she stared at the holographic screen with lingering fear. Such a terrifying power. Just a couple of words from her son had resulted in a scary explosion. Yilinger looked at Baizemen and she couldn't help but feel complex emotions in her heart. Although she knew it was good to have power in this new world order, the fact that her son had so much power in his hands also worried her, because power always attracted problems. But Baizemen had no time to worry about anything but the two messages that flashed in his retina. You have received the soul power of Second Order Galactic Bull level 63. You have received the soul power of Second Order Abyssal Claw Bear level 65. Baizemen blinked, surprised. This was something he hadn't expected at all. Leader, is something wrong? Shinmei asked as she noticed the slight change in Baizemen's expression. She was characterized as an observant person, to begin with. It's nothing. Baizemen shook his head as he mentally controlled the battleship to approach the now destroyed battlefield. Could this be because I am the Sky Destroyer's recognized commander? Baizemen pondered. He would have to talk to Lilith later regarding this matter, as obtaining soul power using the Sky Destroyer's firepower was something Baizemen did not count on. After approaching the area where the two second-order creatures had been fighting until a few moments ago, Baizemen confirmed that there was no soul stone anywhere before finally controlling the ship to continue its course. The beasts had already started to fight after leaving the forests and running rampant all over the place. It was highly probable that the battle had already begun everywhere in the world. For every second that passed, Baizemen was sure that at least one person in the world lost his or her life in this deadly war that had broken out again. Man, woman, old woman, child, newborn. It didn't matter gender or age. In this era where the only thing that mattered was evolutive strength, things like life were too insignificant. My God. Yilinger looked at the scene outside becoming more and more catastrophic as she covered her mouth with both hands. While the sky was an apocalyptic disaster, the ground wasn't much better. The mana of the world had become so thickly concentrated that when the strong winds began to blow in a single direction it gave birth to a frightening phenomenon that even left Baizemen's blood running cold. What the hell is that thing? Shinmei asked in shock as she looked towards the distant bright blue swirl. It's a mana tornado, Lilith replied, not to Shinmei but to Baizemen. Those mana tornadoes usually appear during the evolution of a world. When the mana of the world reaches a level of purity too high and becomes too heavy enough to grow more compared to the absorption rate of the planet, these kinds of mana tornadoes arise. They will disappear at the end of evolution, causing mana explosions and annihilating everything within 1 kilometer inside their core. Baizemen's expression turned black as he heard the explanation Lilith had just given him, and his heart clenched as he watched the 10,000-foot-high whirlwind that seemed to connect the skies and the earth as it spun and plowed through everything in its path. If what Lilith said was true, didn't that mean that even if one tried hard to survive one could die casually just because one was a bit unlucky to be near such a phenomenon? As if she knew what he was thinking, Lilith pointed out straightforwardly, luck is also part of one's strength. Just as in the past many died from being in the wrong place at the wrong time, this is not much different. Everyone's fate is written in stone, and unless we are strong enough to rewrite the laws of that stone, we have to accept it as it is. Even if you say that. Baizemen couldn't help but mutter such words, drawing the attention of the three women that were looking at him in confusion. Only Kongjun knew that the human in front of him was talking to that strange female who mysteriously appeared and disappeared. Baizemen controlled the Sky Destroyer to make the battleship pick up speed again, and they quickly continued their course. The energy of the soul stones was not infinite, it was being drained by every passing second, and although it was true that the higher the speed the higher the consumption, Baizemen did not really have time to spare. The distance between the Chinese Renaissance base and the Transcendent Factions base was large enough for Baizemen to need a few hours running at his highest speed due to the expansion of the Earth. However, with the Sky Destroyer that distance could close far faster even if he did not push it to its maximum capacity. Approximately 30 to 40 minutes later, Xietain and the others finally managed to see the base where the Transcendent faction was located. Xietan's and Shen Mei's eyes lit up as they stared at the 600-meter-high walls built of mutant tree trunks. Most striking of all, however, was the huge moat that stretched for over 100 kilometers and had a width of approximately 2,000 meters surrounding the entire base. From the battleship, the group could see how large groups of mutant beasts charged down the only available path leading to the only entrance and exit of the fort. However, the mutant beasts were not having much success as they had barely gotten within 500 meters of the drawbridge when thousands of bone arrows rained down on their bodies, and only those with the strongest skins or defensive skills managed to continue charging. Xiaoya's eyes lit up when she realized the majestic effect the water moat had and couldn't help but excitedly remark like a little girl, "Amazing. Not only is the moat large enough to avoid mutant beasts surrounding the base but it's also filled with wild sea creatures to act as a natural defense barrier." She turned to look at Xietain and asked, "Leader, who was the person who came up with all this? He or she is definitely a genius. Something so simple is actually having such a great effect in the middle of the war." Xietain, instead of replying, straightened his back and puffed out his chest as he thought to himself, 80% of this was thought up by this daddy, of course. Shen Mei covered her mouth and let out a chuckle as she looked at Xietain in admiration. Shen Mei's eyes did not escape Yilinger's attention and neither did Xiaoya's admiration. She looked at the two ladies, measuring them from head to toe as if she wanted to check a few things before nodding. She, being the mother of the future king of China, naturally needed to carefully measure her son's future royal harem. Therefore, Yilinger had decided to start making a list right now after witnessing some of the power her son controlled. If Xietain knew that his mother was already planning a harem for him when he actually had yet to introduce her to his fiancée, he would probably spit out 7 liters of old blood and die on the spot. Chapter 713 Bloody War, Part 1. On the ground, above the high walls of the base built by the Transcendent faction. Several minutes before the arrival of the Sky Destroyer, Fu Xiafeng and Nan Gongyi were standing next to people like Lu Yan, Xiao Ming, Luo Ning, Kong Lan, etc. This group was small, but they were all powerful soul evolvers who during the absence of Xietain and most of the faction's top warriors had not stopped improving themselves even with all the work they had had to do. Xiao Ming had the lowest level among them, but he was already a level 39 soul evolver, and it probably wouldn't be long before he reached level 40 considering the situation they were currently in. Luckily we managed to finish the moat 2 days ago, or else even the walls would have been smashed by these damn mutant beasts. Xiao Ming spat down as he said those words, fouling the corpse of a nearly 2-meter-tall mutant dog that had been skewered by more than a dozen of bone arrows. However, these have all been unclassified mutant beasts. Lu Yan pointed with a frown. There was a tinge of worry in his voice as he said carefully, "Even though the moat is deep enough, I fear that if the number of enemies continues to grow, there will come a point where they will build bridges of corpses even in the water." With the help of the little pink dolphin Xiao Xiao, Lu Xiaoyao managed to move huge amounts of water from the sea located farther north and filled the moat that currently surrounded the entire base, making the terrain easy to defend but difficult to attack. Although Xiao Xiao did not feel comfortable around anyone except Xietain, small kids like Luo Ning and the Wen twins could touch her a little and even talk to her without the little pink creature shooting a stream of freezing water in their faces and then ignoring them. However, Lu Yan was right. In fact, when they all looked at the moat filled with mutant piranhas that were as big as a human head, they noticed that the corpses were slowly starting to pile up. "How many bone arrows did we prepare before?" Kong Lan suddenly asked. The bone arrows did not have much attack damage, however, the bones they had been forged from were all bones of first-order mutant beasts, and a large portion of those bones had some kind of energy in them, such as frost-type energy that slowed down enemies or restricted their movements, poison-type energy that weakened and even directly killed those that were hit, fire-type energy that dealt constant damage, etc. Of course, even though these arrows had been forged using bones of first-order mutant beasts, at the end of the day, they were nothing more than arrows from a dead creature, therefore, their effect was limited. At most, creatures below level 20 would be affected, but beyond that they would only cause damage depending on many different factors such as the archer's overall power, speed, falling strength, enemy defense, etc. We were only able to forge just over 250,000 bone arrows. Fu Xiafeng shook his head and said with a frown, "It's only been about 20 minutes since we've been under attack, but 25,000 arrows were destroyed or fell into the moat. We only managed to recover about 27,000 of the ones we released earlier." When a group of mutant beasts was killed, Fu Xiefeng and several other soul evolvers would immediately rush forward, and while slaughtering their way through they would recover as many arrows in good condition as possible before quickly returning to the base. At this rate, we won't even last one day. Nan Gongyi pointed out the obvious. Uncle Nan Gongyi, why don't we use bullets? Luoning asked while biting a fingernail and trying to think of a solution. Everyone's expression became a little uncomfortable upon hearing Luoning's question. Actually, it had been a while since Bai Zemin had opened the arsenal Wuijuan had pointed out, and although he had managed to find ammunition from the different settlements he conquered, the number of armed soldiers and weapons also grew, therefore, the spend had still been too high. That's because we have too few bullets. Kong Lan answered Luoning's question indifferently as she used her dark eyes to observe the surroundings. Besides, normal firearms don't have that much effect on mutant beasts above level 15 unless hundreds of shots are used. Yeah, and what about the second order? The words Luoning was about to say were cut short when Fu Xiefeng shouted out loud as he pointed towards the back of the group of mutant beasts trying to cross the only available land line. Everyone's face changed abruptly when they saw a mutant cat with emerald green eyes leaping hundreds of meters in an instant and quickly approaching the base walls. Kong Lan's expression was serious, but her eyes were relatively calm. She pointed forward and while clenching a purple-colored first-order soul stone activated one of her skills. Sleep paralysis. A large purple-colored magic circle appeared in front of Kong Lan, and at the same time as the magic circle lit up, the power of the first-order soul stone in her left hand, which was a soul stone with poison-like energy, was quickly absorbed by the magic circle. The mutant cat that was clearly an agility-type second-order beast was rapidly approaching and in a maximum of 5 seconds would close the distance enough to jump over the walls. However, because it could only charge in a straight line, the beast had no choice but to continue advancing toward the purple mist flying in its direction. The beast was so fast that the gusts of sharp wind blew aside a big part of the purple mist, but it was not enough to blow it all away. As its body moved into the purple mist, the intelligent creature suppressed its breath and a glint of disdain flashed in its eyes. Seeing this, however, Kong Lan's lips curved slightly as she said to Lu Yan, it's your turn. War tanks number 1 to number 3, open fire with the mutant cat as the main focus. The war tanks that had been hiding on top of the walls advanced and their cannons immediately identified the target. The mutant cat still had that confident expression on its face, but the creature had stopped its movements almost completely, slashing the air with its claws and tearing apart the mutant beasts that passed by it. Boom! 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 The 125mm cannons boomed and the 3 Type 99 tanks fired almost at the same time. However, only a second or two had passed before another short burst of 3 shots echoed across the battlefield. The area around the second-order mutant cat was filled with flying dust and a dense cloud covered the surrounding area. The mutant beasts in the area were turned into a pile of minced meat. Broken limbs and pieces of bones flew everywhere and the piranhas closest to the earth road immediately feasted on the bodies that fell near them, devouring them in mere moments. Did it die? Luoning asked quietly and with some fear in her eyes. She was fully aware of the terror of the second-order beasts. Even now that she was level 44 she couldn't fight one of those monsters and many older brothers and sisters had died facing them. It did. Kong Lan nodded confidently, her pupils faintly reflecting various green characters. She had obtained a small portion of the second-order mutant cat's soul power from being part of the previous raid. As for the rest of the soul power, most of it was definitely wasted. Fu Xiefeng jumped off the wall upon hearing Kong Lan's confirmation. Several mutant beasts came across his path towards the place where the mutant cat was killed but were cut down by either his light sword or his dagger. He entered the dust cloud and picked up a skill scroll before returning to the wall, walking along the walls and occupying his previous position again in an instant. He passed the scroll to Kong Lang and she read the records of the skill called Wind Edge. She shook her head and asked, "Do any of you want it?" They all looked at the skill but none of them wanted the scroll. Even though it was a first-order skill, they all had their own paths and were following Bai Zemin's advice, which was to choose and learn skills that suited their fighting styles or complemented their current skills. This would boost the power of all of them a great notch in the future. Time passed amidst terrifying roars, explosions resulting from some clash between mutant beasts or between mutant beasts and soul evolvers. Bone arrows continued to rain down from the top of the great wall of mana-filled trunks. In just an hour of combat, the human group had been forced to go out and fight the mutant beasts several times while the logistics team prepared by Lu Xiaoyao tried to clear the surroundings. The number of mutant beasts that had been killed had reached such a high point that even with the elevated bridge raised the creatures were using the corpses of their kind to jump up and hit the wall. Fu Xiefeng was in the middle of a whirlwind of flashing blades with lightning sparking around him. He was like a meat grinder, and for every second that passed, there were at least 100 mutant beasts falling to the ground with their bodies full of deep cuts. The unclassified beasts were being slaughtered at the speed of light, and their advance was halted for a brief moment. Next to Fu Xiefeng, Nan Gongyi had already activated his second-order dragon transformation skill and was currently facing more than a dozen first-order mutant beasts by himself. Although he took several hits, the golden scales covering his body were so tough that he didn't even have a scratch on his skin. His fists were so heavy that a single blow was enough to kill one of his enemies, and his tail fierce enough to cut them in two. It was only thanks to the two of them that the other soul evolvers of the Blood Spear Legion were able to retreat after fighting enemies at a proportion of about 120 each. Although Bai Zemin was not present, he had left Kong Lan temporarily in charge of the Blood Spear Legion. The members of the Blood Spear Legion numbered around 4,000 at this point, but in reality, 50% of them were still growing. However, that remaining 50% were powerful warriors with especially pure soul power that were nurtured under Bai Zemin's guidance. In fact, more than half of them had been survivors on the verge of starving to death, but thanks to Bai Zemin were now respected by everyone. Each and every one of them was loyal to Bai Zemin, some more than others, but there was definitely not one of them who was not willing to sacrifice a part of their body for his cause. After all, they all knew in their hearts that the position they were in, the power they had, the bed they slept in, their families, all had been obtained or regained through that young man whom they all awaited his return. You two, return to the wall quickly. Kong Lan's voice rang out from the distance, followed by the sound of the drawbridge falling heavily to the ground. Fu Xiefeng and Nan Gongyi looked back over their shoulder, and the two men were startled when they saw the Transcendent Faction's metal fleet moving forward. Modified buses, bulldozers, modified cargo trucks. Over 40 heavy vehicles were being led by 6 war tanks and approximately 20 IFVs, with the kings of the earth at the front. Shit, Nan Gongyi, you go first. Fu Xiefeng bellowed as the engines of the metal beasts began to sound. Oh, Nan Gongyi didn't plant himself on ceremony. He brandished his claws and ripped apart as many nearby enemies as possible before slamming his tail hard into the ground and stomping down, turning into a cannonball that soared hundreds of meters in a matter of seconds. Fu Xiefeng continued to slaughter for a few more seconds before the war tanks and IFVs began to open fire with their machine guns. Fu Xiefeng turned into a gust of wind, sneaking between the military vehicles and running over the walls before stopping right next to Kong Lan. Ah, elder brother Fu Xiefeng, your armor was damaged. Luo Ning pointed with wide eyes as she looked at the large cut on the abdominal area of the leather armor. Ah, this? It's nothing, don't worry little Ning. Fu Xiefeng waved a hand, trying to make it look like it was no big deal. Even though he was strong and fast, being an assassin, his defense was disgustingly low, and when fighting so many enemies at the same time with his limited mobility zone, it was natural to get hit at least once or twice. He had done well enough considering he had been fighting hundreds of unclassified and several first-order mutant beasts. The metal fleet advanced. The battle tanks fired several times alongside the IFVs. The first-order mutant beasts were turned into meat paste in the face of the 125mm and 90mm cannons, while the heavy machine guns were the bane of the unclassified beasts, as no matter how many of them came, they were all riddled with gunfire. The water in the pit had turned completely red at this point, and the smell of blood wafting in the air was so thick that even the strong winds could not completely blow it away. As they advanced 2,000 meters, the bodies of the mutated creatures were crushed by the war tanks, IFVs, and by the flattening machines. As for the larger corpses, they were all reduced in size using infinite reduction and with various strength-type soul evolvers. They were loaded onto the modified trucks that had been practically rebuilt using materials from mutant beasts. Just as the captain of one of the war tanks received the order to return to the base, a bright fireball flew directly towards the fleet. The size got bigger under the terrified eyes of the soldiers, and before they could even turn back, one of the battle tanks and 2 IFVs were engulfed by the fireball. Boom! The battle tank and the 2 IFVs were immediately turned into a pile of scrap metal, and the resulting explosion hit an IFV that was too close, as well as 2 of the bulldozers. In just 1 second, 6 of the vehicles that were part of one of the trump cards of Bai Zemin's faction were destroyed by an enemy attack, and with it, several lives were lost. The others began to retreat quickly, and under the cover of the Type 99 battle tanks that fired their weapons without rest, they managed to return to the base. And in the whole course they were only attacked by another fireball on one occasion, but fortunately, the enemy did not manage to aim well, so there was no major damage except for one of the IFV's cannons, which was unusable now. The lift bridge was raised and the fleet entered before the bridge fell again, closing the connection to the outside world. In the sky, thousands of kilometers above, sitting in the command room of the Sky Destroyer, Xietain, who had just arrived a minute or two ago, wanted to shed tears as he watched his precious battle tanks suffer such a miserable fate, but he could not complain as it had been his own choice to wait and see. Chapter 714 Bloody War, Part 2. Leader, is it okay not to go and help them? Xietain asked calmly as she watched the war raging thousands of feet below them. The Sky Destroyer had stopped right in the middle of a large black cloud where the lightning was fierce, and a single strike was more than enough to turn a commercial or military aircraft into burning debris. However, when the bright lightning approached the giant battleship, a faint barrier of golden light in the shape of a sphere covered the vicinity to prevent it from taking damage. In fact, the barrier only appeared when the lightning was especially strong, or otherwise the body of the battleship was more than enough to take the attack without taking any damage. Thanks to the eagle eye function of the Sky Destroyer, everyone inside the command room could see what was happening below them very clearly. From the mutant beasts running rampant or fighting each other to the vicious war that was unfolding between humans and beasts. Son, I think it would be good if we could help those people. Xietain was a soft-hearted woman. Although she had seen many cruel things since the apocalypse broke out, she had been under the protection of several people, therefore, it was hard for her to understand how this new world worked, and it was even harder for her to see other people dying. No, not yet. Xietain immediately declined. He clarified, they can still do more than this. Until they are on the verge of despair, we definitely won't show ourselves. But, Xietain hesitated. She glanced at the holographic screen just in time to see a soldier manage to shoot a mutant beast to death at the cost of a leg. Xieinger's heart softened as she said quietly, aren't they your subordinates? I don't think it's a good idea to let them die. If it was someone else who was trying to teach him how to do certain things after all the things he had experienced and the countless hardships he had gone through, Xietain would have ignored the person or spat in their face before pointing his finger at them and cursing them. However, since that person was his mother, such thoughts naturally never crossed his mind. But just as Xietain was thinking about how to explain his intention to his mother, Shenmei relieved him of the task. Lady Yi, I'm afraid that's not how things work now. What do you mean? Xietain looked at her in confusion. To her, a life was more important than anything, and in fact, she wasn't wrong. It was just that her approach was wrong due to her lack of experience. How to explain it? Right, let's put it this way. Lady Yi, imagine that your son did not manage to obtain this warship and he had to run from the base to this place. How long do you think it would take him to get here? Shenmei asked after she came up with an idea. Xietain was tongue-tied and at a loss for words. How long would it take for his son to get from the south to this faraway place? Xietain did not know how fast Xietain could really be, but she believed at least 2 or maybe 3 days. When Shenmei heard Xieinger's answer, she couldn't help but let out a chuckle, and even Xietain smiled before she shook her head without saying anything. No one corrected Xieinger's thoughts, nor did they tell her that she underestimated her cub too much. Instead, Shenmei nodded and continued, then, let's suppose that your son could reach this place in half a day's time instead of 2 days. This half a day's time includes the time that Xietain would have to stop to face the different adversities he would meet along the way. Xietain nodded silently. During those 12 hours, this place could be taken to the ground. It's only been a little over 70 minutes since this whole mess started. Shenmei explained. Xietan's mother frowned and said quietly, but, Miss Shen, since we are here and my son did get this warship, then why not help? Just because of what if assumptions they were going to let people die? Xietain could not accept it. Lady Yi, what she wants to point out is the fact that the leader won't always be there for us nor for them. Xietain could no longer watch, so she decided to explain it in the simplest and clearest way possible. She looked Xietain in the eyes and said in a clear voice, today, your son is here and can help us to get out of trouble, but what will happen tomorrow? Will he be next to each of his subordinates? That's impossible, isn't it? Xietain did not say anything. She was not stupid, and in her heart, she understood how this worked. It was just that understanding and accepting were two different things. Mother, in this world where modern weaponry became of no use and humanity became probably the weakest race of all due to our weak physical bodies and the partial loss of everything we had built using our intelligence, the only way we can become stronger is by absorbing soul power. Xietain reminded, his eyes still fixed on the screen before him. He continued, if we don't absorb soul power now, which is technically just the beginning of everything, we humans will be left behind, and in the future, we will be food for mutant beasts, zombies, goblins, sea creatures, and probably other races. As the weakest, we have to push ourselves and risk more than the rest to become stronger quickly and close that gap as fast as possible to escape from annihilation. The history books were written in blood and the ground they walked on had probably been paved by at least one corpse for every step they took. As the weakest, humans were destined to suffer in this new era. What Xietain wanted was for his people to become as strong as possible at the cost of the least amount of sacrifices. But for them to be strong, sacrifices were inevitable. All we can do is to fight against annihilation, since fighting against death is pointless. Because to fight against annihilation, we need strength, and, to get that strength, we have no choice but to play the game of death. Xietan's words made Ylinger think. She watched the screen and saw how the war between humans and beasts was getting more and more fierce. Her heart clenched every time a soul evolver was injured or lost their life, but ironically she was glad when one of them killed a mutant beast and became stronger. Back on the ground, the war was getting more and more bloody. A first-order level 50 and borderline second-order mutant rhino charged forward. Its 20-foot-tall body was covered in deep brown armor and its eyes were blood-red like the color of the glowing ivories that glittered menacingly under the glare of the lightning. The bone arrows hit its body but did not even make a dent in the body of the beast. Most terrifying of all was that even when over 200 soul evolvers activated all sorts of elemental skills to stop the charge of the beast, the creature's horn glowed and released bloody blades that cut through several of the magic spells, and the few that hit its body barely caused any damage. Roar! In fact, the beast only became more enraged. The level 50 rhino adjusted its stance and its running speed increased exponentially as it stepped onto the dirt road near the base. Behind the rhino-like beast, over 5,000 mutant beasts followed it with bloodshot eyes. Some beasts were so frightened and anxious that they even began to kill each other along the race, and by the time they were near the walls of the human base 1/5 of the total had been killed. At the wall, Nangongyi watched as the mutant rhino crushed every impediment and couldn't help but say out loud, "Hey, Xietain. How about you go and fight that rhino over there? If you can kill it, I'll give you my pay for this month." Fu Xietain rolled his eyes and ignored Nangongyi. He was an assassin and his attacks were focused on quickly finishing off enemies before retreating, but there was no way he could kill that rhino easily by any means. Fire! At Lu Yan's bellow, the 3 war tanks that had been brought to the wall to act as defensive cannons immediately responded, and the military men inside released the ammunition that had been prepared beforehand. However, the unthinkable happened. Boom! 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 The 3 125mm shells hit the body of the giant rhino. However, those shells that could kill almost any second-order existence up to level 70 were unable to kill the level 50 beast. The mutant rhino was forced to stop its charge and took several steps back after being hit by the attacks of the 3 war tanks. The beast roared in pain and the anger in its gaze increased as it felt its skin split and blood ran down its body. Ah! Luoning cried out in astonishment and fright. But she wasn't the only one. Everyone was in shock as they watched on as after stopping for a brief moment, the rhino recovered again and continued to charge forward at full speed. Fuck off! Even tanks can't kill that thing? Nangongyi cried out with his eyes wide open as he looked at the ferocious rhinoceros. This was the first time an enemy had managed to survive and even continue fighting after being hit not once but 3 times by the war tanks. Nangongyi, you stop it. What? Nangongyi turned to look at Kong Lan with his eyes wide open. They looked like they were going to pop out of the sockets with how big they were. You want me to go stop that thing? At least shoot it a couple more times with the tanks for God's sake. Nangongyi almost burst into tears on the scene as he said those words. Subconsciously, Nangongyi looked over his shoulder and casually his eyes met the red eyes of the beast, scaring him for a moment. That rhino had withstood 3 125mm shells. The body of Nangongyi would be sent to oblivion if that thing hit him, and his internal organs would turn into tomato pulp even if his exterior survived thanks to his defensive skills. Kong Lan frowned when she saw Nangongyi acting like this and subconsciously raised her voice. Nangongyi, you dare to disobey me? Don't you already know the penalty for disobeying your superior's orders on the battlefield? Or maybe you think I am not capable of carrying out the punishment? Fu Xiefeng and the others were shocked when they heard Kong Lan's usually calm tone of voice rising. Moreover, the look in her eyes was not at all relaxed and analytical as it usually was, but rather she looked a bit like Xietain at this moment. Even Nangongyi froze as he did not expect this kind of outcome. Seeing Nangongyi freeze as the enemy closed the distance, the expression of Kong Lan finally changed and her dark eyes began to be filled with murderous intent. The number of 125mm shells they had was currently just over 300 rounds. 300 rounds might sound like a lot, but it was very little considering this was all just getting started. Kong Lan could not afford to waste ammunition capable of taking out second-order enemies targeting a first-order mutant beast with frighteningly high defensive capabilities. The current problem was that if the ferocious rhinoceros managed to get close to the walls and had any active long-range destructive skill, Kong Lan could not afford the luxury of doubt and therefore sent Nan Gongyi as he was the only person present who could stop the charge of the rhino. Just as the murderous intent of Kong Lan increased, Nan Gongyi finally came out of his state of shock. His expression turned serious, and with his dragon transformation second-order skill still active, he jumped off the wall with a mighty roar. Bang! Nan Gongyi's feet had barely touched the ground when he launched himself forward with a fierce glint in his eyes as he glared at the mutant rhino with resolution. Humph! Kong Lan coldly snorted before looking at Fu Xiafeng and saying in an authoritative voice, "You get ready too, you will join Nan Gongyi soon." Fu Xiafeng jumped up and looked at Kong Lan a little warily. She looked very different from the Kong Lan he had known so far, even though she was clearly the same person. Chapter 715 Appearance of the Zombie Race. The reason why Kong Lan told Fu Xiafeng to get ready to help Nan Gongyi soon came to light. The 20-feet-tall creature, whose body armor was as thick as the armor of a war tank, looked like an unstoppable locomotive. The ground shook with every step it took, and its red eyes were filled with anger as it thrust its head forward menacingly with its glowing ivory. Nan Gongyi, with his second-order dragon transformation skill active, also looked like a beast. His body had narrowly surpassed 2 meters in height, and the total size of his body was even comparable to Kong Jun, the third-order weaver ant. The golden claws on his hands glittered under the constant glare of the lightning and the rays of light coming from the opaque sun in the sky. Added to the scales that covered 70% of his figure, it gave him a particularly scary appearance that demanded respect. Soon, however, it was shown that the difference between the two was not only in size. When both existences were only meters away from each other, a distance that would close in the blink of an eye, the mutant rhino nodded forward without pausing while Nan Gongyi clenched both fists and punched ahead at the same time. Boom! The earth rumbled and the mutant beasts behind the level 50 rhino were mostly sent flying backward after being hit by the shockwave resulting from the clash between Nan Gongyi and the leading mutant beast. The body of the level 50 rhino surprisingly lifted slightly off the ground when it met the fists of the relatively small Nan Gongyi. However, it was not the rhino who fell at a disadvantage during that brief encounter. Ugh! Nan Gongyi's expression changed as he felt his hands go numb. The mutant rhino's strength went into his arms so violently that his posture broke and Nan Gongyi's arms were pushed backward, away from the creature's ivory. The mutant rhino's charge was effectively halted, however, it did not last long. The beast roared furiously, and taking advantage of the fact that its enemy was backing away, leaving the mark of his feet all over the road, it began to charge one more time. Nan Gongyi was a hot-blooded man too, and seeing the mutant rhino advancing towards him and trying to recover the lost momentum, his eyes were filled with murderous intent, and without hesitation, he shouted aloud, "Barbarian strength!" Nan Gongyi's muscles swelled and his size immediately grew by approximately 50% more, becoming a small giant of 3 meters tall. With the activation of second-order barbarian strength, Nan Gongyi immediately received a boost of 350 strength points. Bang! The giant rhino's body slammed into Nan Gongyi's still retreating body. However, instead of being sent flying, Nan Gongyi clung tightly to the creature's ivory and leaned his upper body forward as his legs kicked up clouds of dust, retreating slower and slower. Finally, a second or two later, the rhino was a little surprised. "Not so strong now, big guy?" Nan Gongyi roared, and now completely halting the rhino's advance, he used his new strength to lift the beast's body. Nan Gongyi's current strength stat was close to 600 points. There was no way a normal first-order creature could handle that. Lifting the rhino's body above his head, Nan Gongyi roared again and with all his might slammed the creature to the ground. Boom! Along with the rumbling of the earth and the terrifying explosion, the cry of pain, as well as anger of the rhino, echoed in the middle of the battlefield. All the mutant beasts within a range of 500 meters were turned into a pile of bloody pulp as they were hit by the shockwave, and only those of first-order or unclassified defense-based managed to survive. Nan Gongyi did not stop, and as if he had lost some of his sanity and turned into a real beast, he roared as he raised his arms above his head. He interlaced his fingers in such a way that his hands formed something similar to a ball and punched without holding back at all, directly at the beast's head. Boom! The mutant rhino's head finally split open, and although it did not explode completely, the green letters that flashed in Nan Gongyi's eyes, as well as the soul power orb that flew into his body, were proof that the battle was over. Nan Gongyi was already at level 50 and therefore he could not obtain any benefits until he completed his breakthrough mission. The same was true for Fu Xiafeng and Kong Lan. However, he could feel that the soul power of the rhino was very pure, which was why it was so strong even though it was still a first-order existence. The skill Barbarian Strength of Nangong-yi was powerful, but it only lasted for 30 minutes and had a cooldown time of 2 hours, unlike his second-order Dragon Transformation skill that could stay active for as long as he wanted in exchange for 1 stamina point every 5 minutes. Therefore, Nangong-yi did not stop after killing the mutant rhino, and as if he had gone mad he jumped up and proceeded to slaughter all the mutant beasts in the area. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. Some pieces of mutant beast fell into the moat to later be eaten by mutant piranhas, while other pieces fell into the only earth road in the area. The sight was really creepy and the smell was unpleasant for anyone. On the wall, Fu Xiafeng watched as Nangong-yi pushed the mutant beast's horde back by himself and couldn't help but observe, looks like he didn't need help after all. However, Kong Lan was not happy. She didn't say anything, but the slight frown on her face said it all. She had made a mistake. She should have told Nangong-yi not to use Barbarian Strength yet. The skill Barbarian Strength was the only skill that Nangong-yi could use in his Dragon Transformation second-order skill, therefore, Kong Lan planned to have him only activated in times of real need. Although the problem of the rhino was serious, they had not reached the point of true doom. If Nangong-yi cancelled his transformation, he couldn't use the skill again until half a day later, therefore, the use of other skills was now out of the question. Kong Lan could not help but be mortified to realize that she was not a good leader. She realized that compared to people like Shangguanbing Shui, Evangeline, and even Wu Yijuan, she was still lacking. Time passed and 30 minutes later Nangong-yi returned to the wall after losing the effect of his skill Barbarian Strength. His whole body was covered in blood, but not even a drop belonged to him. He looked at Kong Lan, and now that he had finally calmed down he noticed that he had made a mistake. Leader Kong, it seems I made a mistake. I shouldn't have activated Barbarian Strength yet. Kong Lan sighed in her heart. She was just beginning to understand the headaches her leader was silently going through, and this only made her admire him even more. It's okay, don't worry about something that's already done. Kong Lan waved her hand and said in a now calmer voice, besides, that half an hour helped everyone to rest, so it's not like you did something really bad. Nangong-yi, sit down for now and recover some stamina to avoid your skill from deactivating. Nangong-yi felt a little better after hearing the words of Kong Lan, and seeing that everyone seemed more energetic compared to the past. He sighed in relief before sitting down amidst applause and shouts of cheers. He had just stopped an entire army by himself for half an hour after all. Kong Lan hoped that no serious problems would appear for the next few hours, at least until the skill of Nangong-yi came out of its cooldown time, as there were only 3 people present with the ability to threaten second-order existences other than the war tanks, herself, Nangong-yi, and Fu Xiafeng. However, this depended on several factors, and luck was one of them. Unfortunately, luck did not seem to be on the side of planet Earth and its living beings, at least not today. After an hour of combat, the battlefield was a mess, to say the least. The corpses of the mutant beasts had begun to form mountains, and 25% of the moat had filled up with enemy bodies to the point that there were now areas where terrestrial creatures could walk. However, the most terrifying change came 20 minutes later. Zombies! Luoning yelled out loud as she wielded her great sword and turned the body of a first-order purple panther into a pile of meat paste. Fu Xiafeng was standing next to the girl, and when he heard her yell in surprise his eyes widened in shock. He quickly looked to the northeast and his expression turned ugly as he saw the black sea of infected creatures approaching. The zombies of today were no longer the same slow zombies of 3.5 months ago. They were now as fast as a normal person running before the apocalypse, and to top it all off, the unintelligent creatures retained their unlimited stamina. Holy shit! Where the fuck did those rotten bastards come from? Xiao Ming shouted in shock as he slashed his sword without rest. His body had several wounds here and there, but he was indifferent to pain at this point and simply fought to end the lives of his enemies as quickly as possible in order to help the rest. The expression on Kong Lan's face was ugly as she looked on as a portion of the group of zombies and mutant beasts broke away from the main army and began to kill each other. Beasts against beasts, zombies against beasts, humans against beasts, and very soon it would be humans against zombies as well. While the current agility of the zombies was no problem for high-level soul evolvers, for humans they meant definite death at this stage unless they were lucky and got up the courage to fight at the risk of their lives. Soon, the 4,000 soul evolvers had to split up to fight zombies and mutant beasts at the same time as the zombies fought the mutant beasts and the mutant beasts fought among themselves. Along with the activation of all kinds of skills, blood flew everywhere and small explosions joined together to form even more terrifying explosions. The number of enemies was simply too high and the moat was slowly being filled with corpses. The mutant piranhas had practically stopped eating flesh and only occasionally took a few bites before sinking into the waters. As the moat began to fill up, the human group was slowly beginning to be overwhelmed by the numbers of the enemy. Because the main soul evolvers of the Transcendent faction were facing existences above their levels or several existences of their own order at the same time, the rest had no choice but to fend for themselves. Kong Lan was facing a second-order zombie by herself. The zombie had the appearance of a young man, probably around her age. However, this zombie was clearly smart enough to avoid approaching when it sensed the danger that Kong Lan's poisonous skills posed to it. Seizing the opportunity, Kong Lan took a quick glance at the surroundings, and seeing the increasingly pessimistic situation, she couldn't help but start to grow anxious. Although she was enjoying a boost in her overall strength thanks to the effect of her loyal follower subclass, the zombie she was facing was on a different power scale, which separated them enough that she wouldn't be able to finish the fight anytime soon. In fact, Kong Lan was not confident that she could defeat this second-order zombie and forget about supporting the others. The only way was to get the war tanks to fire, but that would also put her in mortal danger. Finally, and with no other choice, she pulled the communicator out of her bag and ordered in a cold voice, "Open fire at will." Her words had barely fallen when from the top of the giant wall, the heads of armed soldiers were revealed. Some of them carried rifles, snipers, light machine guns, heavy machine guns. Some had even positioned themselves behind machine guns that had been dismounted from military vehicles to use as a defense in front of the main gate. "Ha! From a high point, the advantage is ours," a commander shouted before ordering, "Brothers, open fire." Immediately after, the sound of steady bangs echoed and reached the distance easily. From the distance, the golden glow of gun muzzles could be seen as a straight line as more than 10,000 armed soldiers fired at the same time. The zombies and unclassified mutant beasts began to fall like flies and the pressure on the 4,000 soul evolvers immediately eased greatly. There were even some first-order zombies and first-order mutant beasts with weaker bodies that fell in their own blood after taking several shots from 100 heavy machine guns. "Kill!" Lu Yen shouted and immediately led a team of soul evolvers to cause carnage in the midst of the zombie horde. "Kill! Kill! Kill!" They all roared in unison and their eyes looked even more bestial than the beasts themselves. The second-order zombie who commanded this army of zombies was shocked at the human outburst and for a moment he even went into a panic. According to his knowledge after absorbing countless records, humans were fearful creatures, especially of his zombie race. How had these humans suddenly become killing machines? What the second-order zombie was seeing was nothing like what was in his records. Seeing the second-order zombie in shock, Kong Lan didn't hesitate as she muttered under her breath while slyly pointing towards the ground, "Illusory mist." The second-order zombie immediately became attentive when he noticed the fluctuation of mana around him. However, when he wanted to back away, his body was enveloped by a multicolored mist and the sparkle in his eyes dimmed a bit, slowing his movements in the process. Chapter 716, Falling in a Trap. Kong Lan seized the opportunity when the second-order zombie's movement stalled for a brief moment. She waved her magic staff and at the same time as she backed away she threw what appeared to be a small black seed. Kong Lan pointed one hand forward and waved her staff while shouting aloud, "Heart Devourer." A magic circle appeared at the tip of the magic staff and immediately a beautiful purple-colored cloud burst outward. The mist enveloped the surroundings and in just an instant engulfed the second-order zombie and all the creatures near the zombie. Bang! The small black seed exploded and a pile of jet black spores melted into the purple mist. By the time the second-order zombie regained his composure, his organism had already absorbed a large amount of poison. Scram! The zombie roared furiously as he used his sword to slash in a wide circle around his body. Bang! The purple mist with motes of black was expelled in a flash and Kong Lan was forced to retreat even further as her body was struck by the wind blades resulting from her enemy's slash. However, the expression on Kong Lan's face was calm and composed. Her dark eyes flashed strangely as she noticed how a part of the second-order zombie's face began to change its color. "Human woman, I'll rip out your tendons and eat them while you're still alive." The zombie roared angrily before charging at lightning speed towards the human before him. Kong Lan silently activated lightning movement and began to flicker across the battlefield as she activated various skills constantly. The second-order zombie was definitely faster, but Kong Lan was cunning. She blended into the different battlefields, and using her enemies as a shield after using skills like paralysis of sleep and others, she forced the second-order zombie to waste a bit of time to kill them and continue charging. Kong Lan knew she was going to be overtaken soon, but she wasn't worried. Looking over her shoulder, she noticed that about 1/4 of the zombie's head had turned purple with black dots. On another battlefield, Fu Xiafeng and Nangong Yi joined hands to fight against a second-order mutant snake. Nangongyi was in charge of stopping the beast's movements, as his only good quality at present was his high defense, while Fu Xiefeng appeared and disappeared around the creature's body, which was 150 meters long. Although the snake's scales were extremely tough and there was a weird liquid around its body that made it difficult for Fu Xiefeng to damage it, several bloody cuts could be seen on the back of the animal. "Hey, Nangongyi, what's wrong? Don't get hit by the tail. Brat, you think this old man doesn't know that?" Nangongyi's body was covered with wounds as he battled against the fierce bites and headbutts of the beast. But he didn't care, as long as he avoided the tail, everything would be fine. Slowly, the second-order snake began to lose more and more blood. Approximately 10 minutes later, a trace of exhaustion shone in the eyes of the beast as it looked at Nangongyi cautiously and scanned the surroundings, trying to find the other elusive human and the cause of its current situation. Nangongyi was gasping for air, and approximately 60% of the golden scales covering his body had been split by the second-order mutant snake's attacks. The only thing Nangongyi was thankful for was that this beast didn't seem to have any acid attacks and its only quality was poison, but Nangongyi had already taken an antidote for this kind of enemy beforehand. Swoosh! Seeing the mutant snake charging toward him again, Nangongyi gritted his teeth and advanced to face it. Boom! 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 The surroundings were a mess, and with every vicious attack from the beast, Nangongyi was forced back, increasing the size of his wounds and adding more to the mix. It was in one of those trades that Nangongyi overlooked a small move from his enemy, and the mutant snake didn't give him time to fix that mistake. Swoosh! The thick green giant tail grew bigger and bigger before his eyes, and Nangongyi had no choice but to grit his teeth and get ready to receive the impact. He crossed both arms in front of his body and began to pray to all the gods and demons he knew. Boom! Nangongyi's body was sent flying, and he felt the bones of both arms breaking into at least 2 or 3 pieces each. He could do nothing against the torrent of blood that flew out of his mouth, let alone the blood that flowed from his shattered muscles. Nangongyi fell to the ground 200 meters away, but his body continued to roll for another 100 meters before stopping. The face of the soldiers and soul evolvers who saw his body covered in blood and his arms turned inward at an impossibly acute angle turned pale. "Boss Nangong! Damn it! Stop that snake!" Nangongyi was a well-liked person in the faction. He was neither the smartest nor the strongest, but he was an upright person that said and acted based on his thoughts and feelings. In addition, the number of lives he had saved on many dangerous occasions was not small at all. Not to mention the fact that Nangongyi was considered one of the war generals that no one wanted to see fall. Surprisingly, several soul evolvers managed to quickly kill their enemies at the cost of wounds of different magnitudes. One of them even lost a hand but gritted his teeth and turned around while running towards the mutant snake with bloodshot eyes. Nangongyi tried to stand up and was very moved at the sight of what was happening, so much so that tears began to spill down his mangled face. Unfortunately, his brain seemed to have shut down in the face of the pain, since he could not even move a muscle. Ironically, it was at that moment that his skill barbarian strength came out of its cooldown time. If Nangongyi could have endured a couple of seconds more, the outcome would have been very different, and he alone could have put up a good fight against the mutant snake. Swoosh! The mutant snake rushed forward, sliding across the ground at lightning speed and closing the distance between it and Nangongyi in an instant. Its movement speed was faster than that of the other soul evolvers, so despite everyone's goodwill, none of them managed to make it in time. Bang! 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 The soldiers on the walls could only see a green flash moving due to the high speed of the beast, but none of them hesitated to pull the trigger of their firearms while aiming at the possible trajectory. Several shots hit the mutant snake's body with accuracy, but far from damaging it, they were not even able to tickle it, since regardless of whether it was a heavy machine gun or sniper ammunition, they all bounced off when they touched its scales. Just when Nangongyi could feel the smell of fish penetrating his nostrils and the shadow of the second-order snake was hovering over his body with its mouth wide open, a small shadow appeared just above the creature's head. By the time the second-order mutant snake realized what was happening, the person who had appeared just above its head and falling from the sky had already reached it. Swoosh! A clean and flawless stab, right in the only weak area of any living being, the eyes. The mutant snake writhed in pain and a weird choking sound came out of its wide-open mouth. A large gush of blood shot out from where the snake's left eye had previously been, which had now turned into a pile of gray and white pulp. Lu Yen! Fu Xiefeng shouted from the depths of his soul as he held on tightly to his dagger to keep from falling. The mutant snakes writhed so hard that the surroundings were blown up every time its tail swung, and fortunately, there was no one nearby, or else they would have turned into a gory pile of bloody mist. However, there was one person who was too close and could die at any moment if in a stroke of bad luck the giant snake's tail hit him, Nangong-yi. Lu Yen was one of the highest-level soul evolvers and happened to be the closest. Hearing Fu Xiefeng's call and seeing the young man who was as thin as a stick fighting against the ferocious beast, Lu Yen gritted his teeth and charged forward in order to get Nangong-yi out of the danger area. Fu Xiefeng gritted his teeth and felt the blood throughout his body stir with every shake the second-order snake made. But in fact, he had not moved away yet because he was charging his most powerful and destructive attack skill. As Lu Yen quickly approached, he did not take long to notice that the blue-colored dagger in Fu Xiefeng's hands began to glow, and that glow was growing rapidly. After managing to avoid some of the casual swings of the wounded creature's tail, Lu Yen grabbed Nangong-yi's body and ignoring his complaints of pain ran out of the area without looking back. Seeing Lu Yen carry Nangong-yi away, Fu Xiefeng sighed in relief. His eyes were as cold as the edge of his dagger, and as a thin trickle of blood slipped silently from inside his mouth, he activated the skill he had been channeling all this time. Final flash. The young assassin's cold voice could be heard even amidst the constant roars, explosions, and cries of pain. Immediately after, a thunderous explosion followed by a bright electric blue light illuminated everything 1,000 meters around. Boom! A large flash of lightning illuminated the area 1 kilometer around Fu Xiefeng, and there were several mutant beasts and zombies that were engulfed in what seemed to be a sea of blue lightning. The beasts writhed before falling down with smoking bodies while the weaker zombies simply exploded and their blood was vaporized. Final flash, the strongest and most destructive skill Fu Xiefeng possessed, the one he learned when he entered the First Order and obtained his special job. It was the only skill that allowed an assassin like him to inflict large amounts of damage to targets with high defense. Fu Xiefeng kicked the head of the snake he was standing on and jumped backward. As his body spun in the air he heard the heavy sound of the beast falling to the ground, and an instant later, the sweet message he had been waiting for flashed in his eyes informing him that he had officially entered the Second Order and apart from receiving a juicy increase in his overall stats he also went straight to level 59. But Fu Xiefeng did not stand around celebrating and instead rushed to the battlefield to join the fray immediately. Although he really wanted to confirm Nangong-yi's current status, his newly acquired strength was definitely needed in the battle that seemed to be far from over. With the joining of Fu Xiefeng who had just entered the Second Order, the pressure on the other soul evolvers was greatly relieved. Kan Lan, on the other hand, was experiencing problems. The Second Order zombie was holding out more than she expected, and her stamina was dropping fast. She was a mage to begin with. Kan Lan would have to be on the back lines with thousands of melee warriors protecting her, but due to the circumstances she had no choice but to put her neck on the line and go out. I think that should be enough for now, she muttered under her breath. Damn! It was also then that the Second Order zombie understood what was going on. The intelligent creature looked at Kan Lan and growled, "You tricked me? All you humans are despicable creatures." Kan Lan looked at him and said quietly, "Thank you for your praise." Then, she did something that no mage should ever do, she ran straight at her enemy who was a melee combatant. This was because the zombie before her had just lost 50% of his power and for the next 5 minutes he would be at her mercy. However, to Kan Lan's surprise, the Second Order zombie grinned horribly and growled, "Too bad, human woman. This time, you have been played at your own game." Kan Lan felt a bad premonition just as the Second Order zombie raised his head to the sky and shouted loudly, "Have you seen enough? Attack at once so that damn mermaid will give us what he promised." Kan Lan's expression immediately changed as she felt the danger of death embracing her body. She raised her head abruptly and her eyes twitched as she saw a huge silver-feathered hawk glaring at her with large, glowing golden eyes. Chapter 717 Sword from the Sky. The hawk was really big, the largest bird that Kan Lan or probably any other human being had ever seen with their own eyes outside of a movie screen. Its wingspan was over 30 meters and it had a height of around 30 to 40 meters. Its body was covered with silver-colored feathers that seemed to glitter like precious gems under the glare of the lightning that illuminated the almost completely black sky, as well as the faint rays of sunlight. However, what caught Kan Lan's attention the most when she looked at the giant hawk was nothing of the aforementioned nor was it its legs covered by sharp, emerald-green claws, but rather, it was those two large golden eyes similar to those of an owl. Kan Lan's brain froze as she felt imminent death looming over her, yet, her body that had been trained in the worst environments in tens of thousands of fights reacted on its own. She stopped her steps and instead of continuing to approach the Second Order zombie, she kicked the ground beneath her feet, jumping backwards and trying to put distance. It was also at that moment that the silver hawk attacked. Yet in a backward motion, Kong Lan's pupils trembled when she saw how the golden eyes of the hawk at an altitude of over 500 meters lit up. The two eyes glowed like lanterns and in the middle of the sky looked like two small, extremely bright and beautiful suns. But Kong Lan was not happy about the beautiful sight, quite the contrary. Swoosh! Swoosh! Just as Kong Lan expected it to happen, as this kind of image was very normal even in movies, two bright beams of light that looked like laser beams shot out from the two eyes of the silver hawk. And even though Kong Lan was backing away, it was not difficult for her to realize that the beast in the sky had even understood her trajectory and trajectory speed to hit right at the precise spot where she would be in the next instant. Just as Kong Lan was about to be hit by the skill of the silver hawk, a golden-colored barrier appeared around her body. Bang! The golden barrier only resisted for a second before shattering into pieces. However, before the golden beams could continue advancing, a second golden barrier appeared around Kong Lan and stopped them again. Bang! The second barrier was also destroyed and the two bronze bells that had floated above the head of Kong Lan protecting her from danger returned to the inside of her bag. Although the two objects only resisted for 1 second each, those 2 seconds was enough time for Kong Lan to change her trajectory of movement and move away from the place she believed would be the place of impact. However, the worst thing that could happen, happened. Ha 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 ha. The second-order zombie laughed as he watched the two golden laser beams hit the ground and carved deep holes the width of a fist before moving and chasing after the human woman. The creature sneered as he tried to suppress the poison that was still attacking him inside. Human woman, I fell for it before too, so don't worry too much. The expression on Kong Lan's face was serious and her face was beginning to fill with small beads of sweat as she tried to move away from the two golden laser beams that were chasing her. She heard the soul evolvers around her crying out in concern, but she had no time for them now as her agility didn't seem to be enough to compete with the magic skill of a second-order beast. Just as she was in real danger, Kong Lan felt her entire body become much lighter than before and an electrifying but pleasant current coursed through every cell of her body. In just an instant, she noticed how her agility stat and the rest of her stats received a boost that she considered tremendous. Thank you, my dear leader. Kong Lan couldn't help the corner of her lips lifting slightly as she realized that this was the result of the life-saving effect of her loyal follower subclass. Bang! Kong Lan kicked the ground under his feet using all her strength, and taking advantage of the increased stats, she burst out with new movement speed, moving away from the two golden-colored laser beams and leaving them further and further behind. The second-order zombie's laughter stopped and his eyes widened in shock as he watched the human woman flying away. What happened? The zombie was puzzled but couldn't find an answer no matter how much he thought about it. The hawk in the sky also began to decrease the power of its attack after leaving two long and deep trenches over 400 meters long as it realized that the human woman was suddenly out of its reach. When the danger passed, Kong Lan immediately noticed how her stats returned to normal and she also stopped her run while looking back cautiously. Do you want to read more chapters? Hey, are you okay? Fu Xiefeng appeared beside her like a ghost and asked in concern and at the same time slightly surprised. He had seen the events unfold, and had been running in this direction to support Kong Lan, but it was too far away so Fu Xiefeng knew it would take longer than the time he had to get to her and give her help. Fortunately, it seemed that Kong Lan was hiding some of her strength and that allowed her to escape. I'm fine. Kong Lan replied with her eyes moving between the second-order zombie and the silver hawk. The appearance of the hawk had ruined her plans completely. Fu Xiefeng scanned the surroundings and frowned heavily as a glint of worry flashed in his eyes. The war was continuing, except that this time a change had occurred, a huge change. The beasts that had been killing each other were still killing each other, as well as attacking humans. However, the beasts and zombies were no longer fighting between themselves. Except for the still 50% uncontrolled beasts, the two races were attacking the human settlement. The pressure on the soul evolvers increased exponentially as the proportion of enemies they had to face grew. With little space to move, the agility stat had been partially sealed and the level of risk of being scratched by zombies increased. In fact, the only reason the human evolvers had not yet fallen was thanks to the weapons that allowed them to keep their enemies at a distance and their armor that not only served to mitigate some of the damage received but also prevented the claws of normal zombies from touching their skin. Nan Gongyi had been carried by Lu Yen back to the walls and Lu Yen had joined the fight immediately after. Because Fu Xiefeng and Kong Lan were currently tied up by the two second-order existences in front of them, no one had time to rest at all and they had to do their best to survive. Kong Lan, this is bad. Fu Xiefeng whispered softly, covering his mouth with one hand to prevent the enemy from being able to read the movement of his lips. Kong Lan nodded imperceptibly without saying a word. She understood that the current situation could hardly become worse than it already was. You two should be the leaders of this establishment, shouldn't you? The second-order zombie finally broke the silence after regaining approximately 70% of his strength. He could now suppress the poison with considerably more tranquility and ease. Neither Kong Lan nor Fu Xiafeng answered the zombie's question, both were focused on the surroundings and the sky, therefore, they could not afford to be distracted. But the male zombie didn't mind the other party's lack of response. Instead, a fierce smile appeared on his face, a stark contrast to his suddenly soft and calm voice. How about this? If you guys surrender, then we promise we won't kill anyone else. That's not a bad deal, is it? The second-order zombie's voice was not loud at all, and amidst the constant explosions and roars of war that enveloped the surroundings, it could easily have been ignored. However, the creature's words sounded as loud as the beating of war drums in Fu Xiafeng and Kong Lan's ears. They both jumped in surprise and their eyes widened in shock as it was hard for both of them to believe that what they had just heard was true. In fact, the shock Fu Xiafeng and Kong Lan felt was so great that for a moment the two forgot not to take their eyes off the two enemies before them and looked at each other as if to make sure they had just heard correctly. The male zombie seemed very satisfied with the reaction of the two humans, and when he saw that neither of them said anything, he began to speak again. Even though I have eaten many human brains and absorbed countless records of this race, I still do not understand very well how the strange hierarchy of power among you works. Let me tell you that for my zombie race, when one breaks into the second order, the mental block that limits our ability to think and reason is removed. With the ability to think and reason, we second-order zombies gain the skill to lead an army of up to 1 million normal or first-order soldiers with approximately 70% freedom. Scree! Kong Lan and the others raised their heads skyward as the hawk began to flap its wings and let out a thunderous screech. I know, the second-order zombie shouted back. He looked at the human duo and continued, unlike that beast in the sky that can't speak despite being in the second order and barely being able to lead an army of up to 100,000 mutant beasts with only 50% freedom, we zombies are different. So, as long as you guys surrender, I promise that at least 90% of you won't get eaten tonight. How about that? Surrender? The zombies wanted the humans to surrender? Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng were in shock. This was the first time they had heard of such a thing. It was normal for zombies to eat humans or anything that crossed their path regardless of race. Even the intelligent zombies Xietain had faced so far were no different in this respect. In the sky, inside the Sky Destroyer, the expression of Xietain was thoughtful while the expressions of Shenmei, Xia, and his mother Yilinger showed that they were just as shocked as Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng. That zombie talked about a male mermaid. Shenmei looked at Xietain as she said these words. She, unlike Xia and Yilinger, knew that Xietain was in alliance with a female mermaid. Suddenly, Xietain stood up and attracted the attention of the people in the command room. Leader? Xia looked at him in surprise and stepped back to make some space for him to walk past her. Kong Jun, follow me. The rest of you all wait here. Xietain commanded and his body suddenly disappeared without giving anyone time to say anything. Along with Xietan's disappearance, the weaver ant covered by a thick dark cloak also disappeared from the room like a ghost after being enveloped by a faint white light. On the ground, Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng's expressions were ugly. The second-order zombie didn't look anxious, but the hawk in the sky clearly didn't have such patience. Besides, for every second they stood there doing nothing, the danger for the human troops increased. More than 300 soul evolvers had lost their lives so far, along with more than 2,200 other armed soldiers, as well as the explosion of 3 battle tanks, 7 IFVs, and more than 40 military or modified vehicles. Even though the number of enemies killed was countless times higher, such kind of loss was too much for the not yet fully established humanity, and both Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng knew that by every minute the death and loss count would increase more and more. You guys can take your time Although, I'm afraid many might die in the process. Besides, the male zombie laughed slyly. A large-sized fluctuation of mana and magic rippled across the sky and the zombie said quietly, I'm afraid my teammate might not be as patient and wait as I am. At a little over half a kilometer high, the silver hawk's eyes glowed again. But compared to the previous time, the glow in its eyes began to grow brighter and brighter with each passing second. The expression of Kong Lan became even uglier when she realized that the attack the beast was going to launch this time was several times more terrifying than the previous one. And the worst of all was that she could do nothing to prevent it from launching it. Fu Xiafeng clenched his dagger tightly in a flash of anger, as well as helplessness, shone in his black eyes. He was an assassin and his range was even shorter than that of a normal warrior. While he could leap and attack the hawk, that would leave him exposed to the attacks of the beast that could move freely through the air. Just at that moment, the glowing eyes of the hawk shut off and the beast abruptly raised its head to the sky. A curious sound came from its peak, but before anyone could understand what was happening, a flash of red light fell from the clouds with a mighty thunderous boom. The hawk's body was hit right in the back even before it could move away from the object's trajectory. The beast didn't even understand what was happening when its body was brought to the ground. Boom! The ground shook, causing everyone within 2,000 meters around the impact center to stagger. Amidst the powerful rumbling, a large cloud of dust rose into the sky and covered the sight of everyone in the vicinity to the point where, if one were to look from afar, they could see bright lights of the different magic skills amidst a blanket of darkness. Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng were just like the others and had no idea what was going on, but they both raised their guards to the maximum and even began to panic a little. Bang! An explosion followed by a strong gale blew all the dust away from the surroundings, and when everyone's sight cleared, they saw the male zombie finishing a diagonal slash. However, what caught the attention of everyone was the center of the crater, which was more than 300 meters deep. The hawk that a moment ago was hovering in the sky and looking down on all living things with disdain, flapping its powerful wings covered with beautiful silver feathers, was now stuck in the ground. Its back had been split in half and red blood along with fragments of inner organs bathed the creature's back, staining its silver feathers in crimson. On the beast's back, a sword approximately 2 meters long crackled with constant lightning flashes of bright red dancing around it. At the sight of that sword, Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng's eyes sparkled. They both looked at each other for a second before looking back at the great sword, letting out sighs of relief simultaneously. Chapter 7:18 Blood Mist with a single blow. W.H. Watt. The dust had not yet fully settled when the second-order zombie came out of his stupor. The creature that was now fully aware of emotions such as awe and fear, subconsciously took 2 or 3 steps back as he raised his own sword and pointed it at the great sword with red flashes of lightning. What the hell is going on here? The male zombie clearly roared in annoyance at not being able to understand what this was all about. Hey, stupid bird. Hey, damn hawk. Fu Xiafeng and Kong Lan listened indifferently as the second-order zombie tried his best to try to call out to the silver hawk that didn't move. The eyes of the two humans were indifferent as they watched the beginning of the despair of existence in front of them. However, despite his despair coming mostly from not knowing what was happening in front of him, the male zombie was a second-order powerhouse. Bang! The creature stomped hard on the ground beneath his feet, causing deep cracks to appear in the surrounding area and the ground he was standing on to sink. In just an instant, the second-order zombie had disappeared from his position. Kong Lan felt something cold approaching her neck, and even though she was unable to follow the movements of the second-order zombie's sword, her expression remained unperturbed. Clang! Human! Zombie! Fu Xiafeng scoffed as he blocked the male zombie's sword with his dagger. There was no longer any anxiety in his eyes and he even dared to joke a little. This was the result of the appearance of the transcendent faction's god of war. Even if Bai Zemin hadn't shown himself yet, his signature weapon was stuck on the back of the formerly proud and arrogant silver hawk. That giant sword and crimson lightning flashes were unmistakable, and anyone who had fought with Bai Zemin on at least one battlefield would recognize it at a glance. The figures of Fu Xiafeng and the second-order male zombie became blurry before the eyes of Kong Lan. She watched as sparks flew everywhere like fireworks at the same time as the sound of metal clashing against metal echoed around her. The two second-order existences continued to clash and apparently, the agility of the two was quite similar. The same seemed to be happening with the strength stat, therefore, the battle would definitely not end anytime soon. As the war continued, Kong Lan was the only one standing silently and motionless, but strangely she was also the only one who did not receive any attacks. She raised her head to look up at the apocalyptic sky, narrowing her eyes as if trying to see beyond the dense clouds of mana in which lightning flashed. In the sky, standing at the edge of the Sky Destroyer and where the winds were blowing especially hard, Bai Zemin nodded in satisfaction as he received the records of the silver-feathered hawk after throwing his weapon from approximately 20,000 feet in the air. Lilith, you were right, Bai Zemin said as he looked down casually. I only needed to activate gravity manipulation X5 to kill that bird. Lilith rolled her eyes and pointed, Jesus Christ, are you dumb? Even though the maximum of gravity manipulation is X30, that doesn't mean you have to always activate the skill to its maximum. Earlier, Bai Zemin was about to launch his greatsword which weighed 6,000 kilograms from approximately 20,000 feet, but not satisfied with that, he wanted to activate gravity manipulation to the maximum possible. Thankfully, and he had a sane person at his side, or else forget about the hawk or his subordinates would probably have been affected by the shockwave. Better safe than sorry, isn't it? said Baizeman as he took a step forward, stepping into the void. He turned to look at Lilith, and just as his body was falling he said loudly, "Besides, from here I couldn't even see that silver bird." "What?" Lilith shouted and quickly followed him, jumping off the battleship. Her ink-black hair danced furiously as the surrounding wind was cut off by her free fall, and as she stared at Baizeman who was falling a few feet ahead she shouted, "You threw that thing of yours without even seeing the enemy? Are you crazy?" Baizeman turned around in mid-fall to look Lilith in the eyes. "My precious Lilith, did you just now realize it?" He laughed out loud as he felt the surrounding wind becoming more and more violent. Lightning flashed past a few meters from his body and he looked especially small and fragile in the midst of the dark sky covered by destructive energy. "Do you want to read more chapters?" Lilith could not help but shake her head as she muttered something to herself. Kong Jun, the third order apocalyptic ant, had jumped immediately behind Baizeman and Lilith. The creature was silent as he clung to the cloak that flapped furiously in the strong winds. Even his size was insignificant in the sky. Baizeman closed his eyes for a few seconds. With his eyes closed and with his ears only listening to the loud thunder rumbling in his surroundings, as well as the strong passing of the wind, Baizeman felt as if he had entered a completely different realm. Despite being surrounded by destruction, he somehow felt strangely relaxed. However, Baizeman knew that he could not stay with his eyes closed like this for much longer. Even he would suffer several serious injuries if he casually fell from such heights. Or at least his past self. He turned his body so that his feet were now pointing towards the ground, and despite the distance, he caught a glimpse of the horrific battlefield that was getting worse with each passing second. With the death of the mutant beast army commander, the creatures had begun to attack each other more madly than before, and now the zombies had also become their targets again. Although the pressure on the human group had decreased tremendously, things were still far from brilliant. Kong Lan, who had been looking up at the sky all this time, noticed two objects falling from a great height. At first, she wasn't too sure, but it didn't take her long to identify Baizeman's face, and her lips immediately curved upwards. When Baizeman was approximately 900 meters from the ground, he activated gravity manipulation to the maximum possible, but in reverse, and his body immediately seemed to have fallen into a strange, invisible swamp as the speed at which he was falling abruptly decreased. Of course, Kong Jun continued to fall like a cannonball and in an instant passed beyond Baizeman. Boom! A huge cloud of dust rose up with the place where Kong Jun had just fallen as its center. The weight of the ant was so great that added to the falling speed the ground shook so much that it barely missed Baizeman's previous attack. Fu Xiafeng and the second-order zombie that had been fighting immediately stopped after one more short trade, quickly retreating as they looked at the cloaked silhouette with fear and caution. Kong Lan also froze as her eyes fell on the 6-foot-tall hooded figure. She could feel mortal danger from the second-order zombie, and the same applied to the silver-feathered hawk. Before its death, however, when Kong Lan looked at the figure covered by that black cloak, all she felt was pure despair. It didn't matter if it was Fu Xiafeng, the male zombie, Kong Lan, or any other existence on the battlefield. They all knew in their hearts that they could do nothing in the face of the creature that had just appeared. Baizeman, who was now falling as light and soft as a feather, watched as Kong Jun's mere appearance silenced the explosions with a gaze filled with satisfaction but complicated emotions in his heart. For a moment, the beasts, zombies, and humans stopped their movements to stare at the cloaked figure. Of course, the brief stagnation only lasted an instant as the mindless beasts and unintelligent zombies immediately began slaughtering again, which led to the humans having to defend themselves once more. Kong Jun, kill all the beasts and half of the zombies. Baizeman's voice thundered from the sky, attracting the human group's attention immediately. Leader? Lu Yan raised his head in disbelief when he heard the voice of that young man who had disappeared for about a whole month. When his eyes fell upon that figure high in the sky that was slowly approaching land, his eyes flashed with hope and he subconsciously shouted aloud, Leader Bai. Leader! Legion Commander! It's the Leader Bai. That person is Baizeman? He's really back. Just in time. There were several new soul evolvers who had joined the troops recently, therefore, not everyone knew Baizeman. However, when the newer ones heard the excited voices of the older ones and when they saw everyone's hopeful face, all the amazing legends about the founder of the Transcendent faction flashed in their memories. However, there were some who were still skeptical. After all, even if Baizeman was powerful, what was before them was an army of over 700,000 zombies and at least 50,000 to 60,000 mutant beasts. But what they saw next was something that chilled their blood and that they would probably not forget for the rest of their lives. It was also at that moment when Baizeman finally understood the reason why Kong Jun was called Apocalyptic Ant by the Soul Record. Upon receiving Baizeman's command, Kong Jun did not hesitate and with a mighty stomp jumped like a spring, soaring into the sky hundreds of meters in an instant and falling in a parabola shape directly into the center of the army of mutant beasts. Boom! The mutant beasts that were 40 to 50 meters close to where Kong Jun had just landed were directly turned into a bloody mist as their bodies exploded into small red pieces after being hit by the shockwave. As for all the beasts outside that range up to a range of 500 meters, they were sent flying in such a way that they hit the mutant beasts behind them. Kong Jun was a weaver ant despite having intelligence comparable to that of an adult human. He did not care about the chaos of his enemies nor did he have feelings of pride in crushing enemies that were insignificant to him. Kong Jun, unlike 99% of humans, was a weaver ant who valued work and finished it as quickly and effectively as possible. His body was not visible to humans, and the mutant beasts were the only thing within Kong Jun's range of vision. The creatures were charging toward him while others were killing each other, but Kong Jun was frigid as always. The third-order weaver ant raised his right fist towards the sky and at the same time as he squatted down abruptly he punched the ground in front of him with full power. Massacre. Kong Jun's hoarse and somewhat strange voice was covered by the powerful explosion that resulted from his punch. Boom! The explosion was so powerful that the rumbling completely overwhelmed the thunder explosions in the sky. Under the shocked and terrified stares of the humans, the ground split and large chunks of earth that had mutant beasts still standing on them broke off to be sent flying hundreds of feet into the air. The cracks extended for more than 5,000 meters with Kong Jun as the core and at least 4,000 mutant beasts fell into them. However, the most terrifying thing had not yet happened. Strangely, no mutant beasts in the surrounding area roared or moved despite what had just happened. A second or two later, however, the body of a mutant beast that seemed to be a mutant leopard swelled up like a balloon before exploding into a pile of small drops of blood. Boom! 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 With the first mutant beast swelling and exploding, all the others began to experience the same fate. Unclassified or first order, big or small, attack type or defense type, none of this mattered as their bodies exploded without letting the creatures even squeal in pain once. Xietan's feet had yet to touch the ground. He was about 400 meters in the air, and as he watched what appeared to be floating islands turn into a pile of dust, as well as the cloud of red blood that in an instant covered everything within at least 3 kilometers, his eyes trembled in terror. Kong Jun had activated a skill, there was no doubt about it. However, a single skill had slaughtered at least 40,000 mutant beasts among which there was definitely no shortage of first-order existences. Xietain could not help but shudder at the mere memory that he had led his group into the Sky Destroyer where this creature awaited them. Chapter 719 Betrayal? Kong Jun's true power was something that Xietain did not know before and all he knew was that the third-order weaver ant was definitely a lot more powerful compared to the other third-order weaver ants that he and Shangguan Bing Shui had fought and defeated. However, what Xietain had in no way expected was such a frightening demonstration of power as the one he had just witnessed. If not for the fact that Kong Jun was an intelligent existence and if he had carelessly carried out Xietan's order, then the entire group of soul evolvers and the human soldiers shooting from the front walls of the base would have been wiped off the map. Worst of all, none of them would have even known how or why they died. How high was Kong Jun's strength stat really? How pure was his soul power? What was that strange but powerful skill he had used? These were the three main questions that Xietain was asking himself at the moment. The only two reasons why Xietain could face enemies far above his level and scale of power were because of the great synchronization his terrifying skills had with each other, as well as the fact that his soul power was way more pure compared to those of his level and therefore that quality could help him close the gap caused by quantity. However, Xietain was clear that he was not the only existence in the universe with very pure soul power, and as a matter of fact, practically all the members of his transcendent faction were existences with relatively pure soul power compared to most of the soul evolvers at their level. Since Xietain had allies like this, he naturally expected to find enemies with very pure soul power in the perhaps not so distant future. The level 50 Rhino was a prime example of this as it even forced Nangong Yi to activate one of his most powerful skills even though they were both at the same level and order. But Xietain definitely did not expect to meet an existence whose soul power was so pure like Kong Jun. He was really happy that things turned out well thanks to the queen of the weaver ant Shirlin, because Xietain didn't even want to think about the consequences of a confrontation against such terrifying beings with Meng Qi and others around. By the time Xietan's feet touched the ground again after his free fall from over 20,000 feet, the mutant beasts and zombies were still continuing to fight even after the disaster Kong Jun had just caused to the battlefield. The human group also began to fight as they had no time to stand and gawk at the apocalyptic scene in front of them. However, the pressure on each of them decreased tremendously now that just over half of the army of mutant beasts had been annihilated. W.H. Watt. The male zombie stepped back while keeping his eyes fixed in the distance. Amidst the cloud of blood, Kong Jun looked like a giant mountain surrounded by rubble and cracks. Even though he was a great distance away, his presence was simply too big and striking after what he just did. In the face of a first-order existence, an unclassified existence was no different from a normal little ant in most cases. Versus a second-order existence, a first-order existence was precisely what an unclassified existence was to the first-order existence. And versus a third-order existence, a second-order existence was simply insignificant to even mention. While a second-order existence had 50 levels to ascend before stagnating and having to complete its breakthrough mission, a third-order existence had twice as many levels to go. More levels meant more soul power, and more soul power meant more overall power. Maybe there were tens of millions of unclassified existences capable of jumping levels and fighting against first-order existences, since the level difference would not even exceed 50 even if the unclassified existence was level 0. However, the fact that those unclassified existences could jump levels to fight against first-order existences did not mean that when they were first-order existences they would be able to face second-order existences, and the odds of them being able to face third-order existences after reaching second order were basically nil unless they were monsters. Among monsters, the male zombie was a level 67 second-order existence. However, in front of Kong Jun he was no different from an ant. Ironies of life. Kong Lan and Fu Xiafeng's faces were pale as they looked at Kong Jun. However, they soon lost sight of him. Boom! Everyone's eyes moved towards the center of the zombie army that was pushing forward and surrounding the base. These creatures that knew no fear were throwing themselves into the moat directly, and after filling a part of it, the zombies walking behind were using the bodies of their fellow zombies to walk through the water. This was only possible because the number of enemies this time had been too overwhelming for the mutant piranhas, or otherwise this kind of tactic wouldn't work at all. Followed by a powerful explosion, the earth split apart and soared into the sky. The pieces of earth were so large that from a distance they looked like small floating islands typically seen in fantasy movies or book illustrations of the same genre. Another huge cloud of blood rose into the sky as tens of thousands of zombies exploded. Not even a fragment of their internal organs remained unharmed as everything was crushed to the point that the only thing visible was blood and more blood. The male zombie had regained parts of his emotions after unlocking intelligence, therefore, fear naturally began to grow in him as he realized that things seemed to have gone south. However, when the creature thought about fleeing, his steps stopped after advancing half a meter. If I were you I wouldn't move too much. The male zombie heard again the voice of the young human man who had ordered that terrifying existence to slaughter the mutant beasts and half of his zombie army. You, when did you put these things here? Xietain looked from behind at the second-order zombie. His eyes were indifferent to the creature's outburst of anger. It seems your intelligence has developed quite well. Too bad, you don't seem to be able to control your temper. Xietain said while casually wagging the index finger of his right hand. Ugh! The male zombie froze as he felt one of the hundreds of thin but lethal blood threads surrounding his body pressing against his throat. The explosive temper of the second-order zombie was immediately turned off when he felt his own blood running down his skin and no longer dared to scream as before for fear that his head would detach from his body. The use of thin blood threads was one of the best methods Xietain had to limit the movements of his enemies. It was just that using them in a battle against powerful existences was very hard since he needed to do it without his enemies noticing. Boom! 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 The sound of explosions and the rumbling of the earth could still be clearly sensed. The smell of blood was incredibly thick, and even with the strong winds blowing fiercely during the world's evolution process it didn't seem like it was going to fade anytime soon. The pressure from the soul evolvers had practically disappeared at this point, and the soldiers on the walls had stopped firing after receiving orders from the higher-ups. Kong Jun's power was being demonstrated in live action for all to see. A single existence eliminating armies. Fu Xiafeng muttered with wide eyes and subconsciously pointed out, somehow, that person resembles the leader in the way he fights. Person? Kong Lan shook her head secretly. She was one of Xietan's loyal followers, so she could also sense that Kong Jun was not human in any way. I guess I could ask him later. Kong Lan reasoned as she watched Xietain walking towards the large silver hawk. Xietain grabbed his greatsword by the hilt and with a nimble leap landed right on the head of the dead beast. He clenched his left fist and without hesitation fiercely struck the animal's forehead. Boom! A large part of the head split into pieces and fragments of broken skull, as well as brain material and thick blood flew everywhere, some of it staining Xietan's armor and face. Oh, it really has a soul stone. Xietain didn't seem to care about the blood running down his face. He reached into the broken head and pulled out the small glowing stone before putting it away in his storage ring. So, he turned and walked towards the second-order zombie. His eyes were cold as he said in a deep voice, "Do you want to live or do you want to die?" The corner of the second-order zombie's mouth twitched as he heard the stupid question from the human in front of him. But more than anything else, what the creature felt was frustration. A moment ago, he was the king and had the lives of everyone in his hands, but in just a second and due to the appearance of this young human, everything had gone to hell. Xietain narrowed his eyes dangerously and with a single thought, one of the threads binding the zombie's body tightened completely. Ugh! The male zombie's eyes widened in pain and a moment later the sound of something falling to the ground reached his ears. When I ask questions, you answer. Are we clear? Even in the midst of the pain and frustration, anger was still visible in the male zombie's eyes as he looked at the young man standing in front of him. He was a powerful second-order zombie, commander of hundreds of thousands of zombies. Now, however, he was being held back by an existence that hadn't even entered the second order? Such humiliation was simply too much to bear. However, when the second-order zombie saw Xietain narrow his eyes again, the pain in his now absent right hand reminded him of the consequences of being disobedient. We are clear. We are clear. The zombie hastily shouted as in his heart he vowed to take revenge when the slightest of opportunities crossed his path. Xietain did not care about the thoughts of the second-order zombie in front of him. In his eyes, the male zombie's soul power was barely above average at best and there was no way such a creature could stand up to him. I want you to answer me some questions, I'll let you live then. How about that? Xietain paused and a smile of disdain appeared on his face as he slowly said, It's not a bad deal, is it? Oh, be quick to respond. Because I'm afraid the threads around your body might not be as patient and waiting as I am. The male zombie gritted his teeth so hard that the inside of his mouth began to bleed. The murderous intent in his eyes was so strong that if gazes could kill Xietain would have been incinerated at least 10 million times by now. Xietain sneered in the face of the male zombie's murderous intent. He had simply returned the same words the creature had said to his subordinates. He wanted the second-order zombie to experience what they experienced when their lives were out of their hands. I will answer what I can and is within my knowledge to the questions you ask me. The intelligent zombie said through still gritted teeth and looking intently at the young human. Good boy, Xietain chuckled as if unaware of the male zombie's expression or anger. Then, his expression suddenly turned serious as he coldly asked, Who is this male mermaid you spoke of earlier? Xietan's expression did not change, but the male zombie's expression did. Although Xietain looked indifferent, in his heart a flame of anger as strong as a raging volcano was silently burning, waiting to be released somewhere before it burst out in him. His faction had an alliance with the 7th princess of the East Sea Xietain. Xietan's goal was to help Xietain in exchange for her helping him conquer the entire area at the edge of China. It could be said that Xietain was a crucial part of his plans and an ally that Xietain valued highly. However, the appearance of another mermaid in the vicinity had put Xietain on high alert. Not only were the sea creatures numerous and powerful, but the fighting style of these creatures was quite unfamiliar, so humans were not used to fighting them. If the sea creatures reached land, the humans would have a huge enemy to face, one probably more terrifying than any other enemy that had appeared so far. I don't know very well about this mermaid. The zombie finally began to speak. His expression had calmed down quite a bit and his voice was coarse and firm in contrast to his previous attitude. The creature stared at Xietain and said slowly, The only thing I know is that this guy seems to be a big fish in the seas, as he not only has powerful bodyguards but his own strength was far above mine and that of the hawk over there. Xietain nodded silently, his expression did not change at all so that no one would know what he was thinking. However, now he could 100% confirm that this male mermaid that the second-order zombie in front of him was talking about was definitely part of the same royal family that Xietain belonged to. It was just that Xietain didn't understand some things. Why had that male mermaid appeared in this area? Why did he want to use the zombies and mutant beasts to force humans into submission? What happened to Xietain? But, the more important question was another. That mermaid princess betrayed me? Xietan's eyes flashed with a tinge of murderous intent that he soon forcibly suppressed. He would focus on getting what answers he could to the questions he had first. He would settle the bills later. Chapter 720, A heaven-defying treasure like no other. Since you don't seem to know very much about this guy from the seas, then just forget it. Xietain casually waved his hand as he said those words. Ugh! The second-order zombie grunted in pain as all the threads around his body tightened and several bloody marks appeared on him. Oops, sorry. Xietain apologized. His voice didn't have the slightest bit of regret in it as he said with a smile, "It's just that I was hoping to get a clearer answer from you and got so disappointed that I subconsciously moved my hand and pulled the threads." Subconsciously? Subconsciously, my ass. It was what the second-order zombie wanted to roar in the young human's face but naturally didn't dare to say. The male zombie in front of Xietain was a pure melee existence, but despite knowing little about the skills of mages he could easily tell that the blood threads surrounding his body were being controlled by magic and mana. It was definitely not something that moved casually just because the other party subconsciously moved his hand. Xietain sneered in his heart as he watched the zombie grit his teeth but didn't say anything. The thing from before had been just a small warning to let the creature know that if he dared to mislead him with anything or hide information from him and he found out, then he would cut him into hundreds of pieces in an instant. So, what about your suggestion from before? Suggestion? Ugh! Don't play dumb, you know well what I'm talking about. Xietain narrowed his eyes and pointed out in a hard voice, "Why were you and that hawk looking for my group to submit? What are the plans of this mermaid male? What did he promise you and that hawk to make two proud second-order existences so willing to become part-time employees?" The second-order zombie lowered his head for a moment. This time, Xietain did not interrupt him even after a few seconds passed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity in the middle of the now mostly silent battlefield in which the remaining zombies were being contained by Kong Jun without killing them just as Xietain had ordered earlier, the male zombie opened his mouth to speak. "I know it will be hard to believe, but the reason why we wanted this human group to surrender is unknown to me, and the hawk you killed didn't know either. When that mermaid guy appeared before us, the stupid hawk and I were fighting near the periphery of the East Sea. Even though that mermaid guy looks like a woman, he is really powerful to the point that neither of us two could do anything against him." Xietain listened silently and without saying a word to what he had just heard. He had learned from Xietain that all the members of the royal family were great talents and every prince and princess was tremendously powerful. Therefore, he did not find it surprising at all that the union of two second-order existences could do nothing against the mysterious mermaid man. Xietain could fight third-order existences even though she was still in the second order about 2 months ago, so it was to be expected that those who shared some of her blood were at least not very inferior in talent. The second-order zombie continued, "Be that as it may, this mermaid guy promised to give us a fruit that allows us to avoid a requirement when it comes to class advancement and—" "Stop!" Xietain abruptly interrupted. His eyes were like those of a beast and he subconsciously took a step forward as he stared at the second-order zombie that gradually began to get worried. "That thing you said just now, repeat it one more time for me." "That mermaid guy promised to give us a fruit that allows us to avoid, or better said automatically completes a requirement when it comes to class advancement." It was not only Xietain who gasped when he heard these words but Kong Lan and Fu Xiefeng standing nearby and listening to the conversation were no different either. When it came to breaking from one order to the other, completing the evolution requirements could become an incredibly tedious task for most depending on the difficulty of the path each had chosen to walk. However, it was true that during that period of stagnation, an existence could hardly become more powerful as all soul power gained would be analyzed and upgraded once all requirements were completed. In other words, if an existence took too long to complete its class evolution requirements, then it was highly probable that said existence would fall behind the rest. This could even put the life of that existence in danger regardless of how brilliant its future might be. In the long history of the universe, there were not a few brilliant geniuses who died in the process of evolution with massive amounts of incredibly pure soul power waiting for them beyond that barrier that blocked them. Many of them even died when they only lacked one last requirement, one last step. If what the second-order zombie was saying was true, one could only try to imagine how precious the fruit in the possession of the male mermaid was. No, wait a minute. Xietan's eyes flashed fiercely as something he almost overlooked sparkled in his head. If the unknown male mermaid really possessed such a divine natural treasure and since both, the second-order zombie and the silver-feathered hawk were willing to work for him, then that could only mean two things. First, the male mermaid had no intention of bearing any fruit. Second, the male mermaid was in possession of a plant that gave him constant supplies of such fruits so he couldn't care less about giving two in exchange for some help on the ground. Xietain narrowed his eyes and asked seemingly to no one, "Can such a treasure really exist in this universe? A treasure capable of even affecting the records of the soul record?" Kong Lan and Fu Xiefeng were confused, just like the second-order zombie. The creature believed that Xietain was talking to him so he quickly replied, "I'm not lying. That mermaid guy was a second-order existence when he appeared in front of me and that stupid hawk, but after eating a strange milk-white fruit, his soul power explosively increased and he shot up several levels after breaking into the third order. I'm sure he was waiting for that precise moment before breaking, so he could convince us that he wasn't lying. Besides, the fruit's records actually gave that description. However, Bai Zemin was talking neither to Fu Xiafeng, nor to Kong Lan, nor to the second-order zombie. To be honest with you, I've never in my life heard about the existence of such a crazy natural treasure as what this zombie is describing. Lilith, who was invisible to everyone except for Bai Zemin and standing beside him, replied. Her voice was very careful and analytical as if she was not quite sure about it but with her own thoughts of the matter. However, little brother Zemin, I think this zombie in front of you might be telling the truth. Bai Zemin blinked. He didn't say anything as he actually also felt that the second-order zombie wasn't lying, but he wanted to know why Lilith thought so. She, even though he didn't say anything, understood his thoughts, which is why after a few seconds of silence she explained. Actually, I think you two have already realized that the Earth doesn't seem to be a normal world. You have been in another world not too long ago, but your experience is not very much. However, I can tell you with confidence that everything that is happening in this world is irregularity after irregularity. Lilith had been astonished by the situation on Earth from the very beginning, when the soul record first appeared. However, it was only after the events near the constellation of the heavenly wolf Sirius that she began to pay more attention to this small blue planet which was not only invisible to the higher existences but was even able to come out unscathed from the attack of one of the most powerful and terrifying beings in history, God. Bai Zemin, Shangguan Shui, Chen He, Fu Xiafeng, the Nangong brothers, Kong Lan, Meng Qi. The number of talents Lilith had seen so far and in China alone were so many that she could not believe that each and every one of them had been born by mere coincidence or not in the same world and in the same era. Each and every one of them, hundreds of people with the talent to become fourth-order existences, all born in the same world and within the same era. Such a thing was absolutely abnormal no matter how Lilith looked at it after comparing it with the countless worlds she had visited either for short or long periods. With natural treasures it was not much different, and the same applied to the speed at which living things and the world itself evolved. In a little less than 4 months since the beginning of it all, the Earth was giving birth to rank 2 and maybe even rank 3 metals, precious herbs, and even divine plants such as was the lightning plant that Bai Zemin had found at the beginning of it all. Bai Zemin nodded silently. He looked at the second-order zombie and slowly said, So, other than the male mermaid, didn't you see another mermaid next to him? This was quite an important question for Bai Zemin. However, the second-order mutant zombie shook his head and replied, I only saw 2 Triton warriors with golden spears next to the mermaid guy. I don't know if there were more underwater. I see. Bai Zemin remained silent for a few seconds, then, he nodded before calmly asking, How were you supposed to contact this mermaid boy to report the success of your mission? Hearing this question, the second-order zombie hesitated. However, Bai Zemin only needed to frown and tighten the threads around his body slightly for the creature to remember the position he was currently in. That mermaid guy said that one of the leaders in this area should have a strange pink dolphin. He said to use that dolphin. He said I only needed to kill it to release a spiritual wave that the royal family sea creatures in the vicinity could feel. We would use that as a signal. Bai Zemin frowned tightly when he heard such words and a glint of relief shone in his black eyes. Although he was also angry at the fact that they wanted to use Xiao Xiao as a sacrifice just for a mere signal, Bai Zemin was mostly relieved that Xian Meier had not betrayed him at all. He had seen the affection Xian Meier had for Xiao Xiao, which was why Bai Zemin in no way believed that the 7th princess was willing to kill the little pink dolphin. It seems that this mermaid guy found out that Xian Meier entered into an alliance with humans. Bai Zemin quickly deduced what was going on. Although he didn't understand the current situation very well and probably wouldn't get too much more information from the zombie in front of him, Bai Zemin could deduce several things from the relatively few pieces of information he had just heard. First, it was clear that Xian Meier was experiencing her own difficulties, or otherwise it was unlikely that she would let one of her siblings sneak into the area she was working and gathering her own army. As to what her current situation was, Bai Zemin did not know exactly. Second, one of the princes of the sea race of the East Sea was finally on the move. What was worse was that this mermaid prince seemed to intend to use mankind for his own purposes, which Bai Zemin did not know but could somehow imagine without too much difficulty. Third, last but not least, a matchless treasure had just appeared in this world. Now that Bai Zemin had knowledge of a treasure that could allow him to complete a class advancement requirement just because, he would definitely not let it go no matter what. Such kind of precious fruit. Even if it only worked once per existence, as Xietain was assuming it was definitely the most valuable treasure of all. In fact, the heart of Lilith was beating violently as she stood beside Xietain. If the higher existences knew about such a treasure, what kind of bloody war would break out? She thought in terror. Worse yet, if those fourth-order existences that have been waiting to complete one last impossible requirement for them were to have access to this kind of fruit, wouldn't the universe be receiving countless factions of higher existences in no time?